The desert doesn't lie. It strips everything down to bone, to dust, to the bare, burning truth of who a man really is when nobody's watching. And in the summer of 1883, in a town so forgotten it barely had a name on any map, one man was about to discover that a single careless joke, spoken in the golden light of a dying afternoon, would cost him more than any bullet ever could. His name was Cole Reardon, a drifter, a man who smiled too easily and felt too little, or so everyone thought. She was called May Calloway, and she was the kind of woman that towns like this didn't deserve. The kind of woman who read books when the candles burned low, who laughed like she meant it, who looked at broken things, broken men, and somehow still found something worth believing in. They had known each other for 2 years. 2 years of careful distance, of coffee shared on porch steps, of jokes used as armor. And then one evening, Cole made a joke that wasn't really a joke at all. She answered him with 4 quiet words. And then she was gone. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Sending love your way wherever you are, because this story is going to stay with you. Redstone Crossing didn't appear on any official map printed east of the Mississippi. It existed the way most forgotten places do. Stubbornly, quietly, held together by habit and the absence of better options. A single main street that stretched maybe 400 yards from one end to the other. A livery stable at the south end. A church at the north, its white paint so old and cracked it had turned the color of old teeth. Between them, a general store, a barber shop, a post office that received mail 3 times a month if the weather cooperated, and the Copper Kettle Saloon, which was the only establishment in town that stayed reliably busy regardless of weather, season, or the moral intentions of its patrons. The land surrounding Redstone Crossing was the kind of land that made philosophers out of ordinary men. Red rock formations rose from the earth like the ruins of something ancient. The sky was enormous, impossibly blue during the day, and at night so thick with stars it felt almost cruel, like the universe was showing off. The heat in summer was not merely uncomfortable. It was personal. It pressed against a man's skin and reminded him, with something very close to malice, that he was temporary, that everything here was. Cole Reardon had arrived in Redstone Crossing on a Tuesday in the autumn of 1881 with a gray horse named Birch, $32, a bedroll, and a history he had carefully left in pieces along the road behind him. He wasn't running from the law exactly, but he was running from something. Men like Cole always were. He had taken up residence in a room above the Copper Kettle, a small, low-ceilinged space with a single window that faced east and a floorboard near the door that announced every arrival with a sharp creak. He worked odd jobs, fixed fences, hauled feed, helped old Garrett at the livery when horses came in lame or spooked. He was useful the way a good tool is useful. Precise, reliable, and not particularly interested in being understood. The town accepted him the way small towns accept most drifters who don't cause trouble. With a watchful kind of tolerance. A handshake that doesn't quite commit. A nod that says you're here, but we're not sure yet if that's a good thing. May Calloway was the schoolteacher. She had come to Redstone Crossing the year before Cole in 1880, sent by a mission society from St. Louis that was in the business of civilizing frontier settlements whether the settlements wanted it or not. She had accepted the post with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself, because May was not the type to be easily surprised by her own feelings. She was 26 years old when she arrived. Dark-haired, brown-eyed, with a directness in her gaze that made men either stand straighter or look away. She lived in a small house on the eastern edge of town, adjacent to the schoolhouse. She had planted a garden in her first spring. By her second year, it was producing tomatoes, beans, and one stubborn rosebush that had no business surviving the Arizona heat, but had decided to do so anyway. Cole noticed her the way a man notices something that makes the world slightly more complicated, which is to say, reluctantly and all at once. Their first conversation happened at the general store, in the canned goods aisle, when Cole had reached for the last tin of peaches and May had reached for it at exactly the same moment. Their hands had not touched, but they had come close enough that both of them registered the almost. "Go ahead," Cole had said. I insist, May had replied, with the kind of firmness that made it clear she was not actually insisting. Cole had taken the tin. He had felt obscurely that this was wrong. Somehow, though he couldn't have explained why. He had eaten the peaches that evening sitting on the step outside the livery and thought about the way she had looked at him. Direct, slightly amused, utterly unimpressed, and found, to his mild alarm, that he couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next 2 years, their acquaintance grew the way careful things grow. Slowly, with a great deal of deliberate inattention. They crossed paths at the store, at the post office, at the occasional town supper that Reverend Hatch organized with the optimistic belief that communal eating produced goodwill. Cole would sometimes find himself walking past the schoolhouse at the end of the afternoon and pausing, not stopping, just pausing, to listen to the sound of children reciting their lessons through the open window. May's voice carrying the lesson forward, patient, clear, certain in a way that Cole found quietly astonishing. He began to help with small things. A loose hinge on the schoolhouse door, a section of picket fence around her garden that had started to lean. He never announced these repairs. He simply did them. She never mentioned that she'd noticed. But she always left a cup of coffee on the porch step on the mornings after he'd worked. They understood each other through the language of small gestures, through things not quite said. And perhaps that was the problem. Because 2 years of careful distance and coded conversation had built something between them that neither of them knew how to name. A structure made of almost, of nearly, of everything they'd circled around without ever touching. By the summer of 1883, the whole town had noticed, with the acute attention that small communities give to matters that are none of their business, that Cole Reardon watched May Calloway the way a man watches a fire he doesn't quite believe is warm enough to touch. And May Calloway, for her part, had waited, with the extraordinary patience of a woman who has decided, quietly and entirely on her own terms, that patience is not the same thing as surrender. She was still waiting on the evening that Cole said the wrong thing, or perhaps the almost right thing. It was a Friday evening in late July when everything shifted. The kind of evening the desert occasionally produces, like an apology for the brutality of the day. The heat releasing its grip just enough that breathing stopped being an act of determination. The sky turning shades of amber and rose and deep violet that would have seemed improbable on a painter's canvas but looked exactly right stretched across 400 miles of open sky. Cole had been at the Copper Kettle since 4 in the afternoon. Not drinking heavily. He rarely did anymore. But sitting at his usual corner table with a glass of whiskey, he was treating more like company than medicine. Watching the room with the idle attention of a man who has learned that observing people is one of the few pleasures that costs nothing. The saloon was moderately busy. Jake Pruitt, the blacksmith, was at the bar telling the same story about a mule he'd once shoed in Tucson that had bitten a deputy sheriff. A story that improved with each retelling in inverse proportion to its relationship with truth. The Dunmore brothers, who ran cattle on the North Ridge, were playing cards in the far corner with the focused silence of men who are losing money and refusing to admit it. Bess, who worked the room with the world-weary efficiency of someone who has long since stopped expecting surprises from human behavior, moved between tables with her tray. May came in at 5:30. This was not unusual. The Copper Kettle served the only proper hot food in Redstone Crossing, and May, contrary to whatever assumptions the Mission Society in St. Louis might have held about the propriety of schoolteachers, was entirely practical about where the decent cooking was. She came in with her friend Clara Moss, who was married to the postmaster and was the closest thing Redstone Crossing had to a social coordinator, in the sense that she was interested in everyone's business and made no particular effort to conceal it. They took a table near the window. Clara did most of the talking, she generally did, and May listened with that particular quality of attention she brought to most things. Present. Real. Not performing interest but actually feeling it. Cole watched. Not obviously. The way you watch something when you've told yourself you aren't watching. Clara said something that made May laugh. Genuinely laugh. Not the polite kind, but the kind that arrived before she could arrange her face. She pressed one hand to her mouth, eyes bright, and for a moment she looked younger than her years in a way that struck Cole somewhere directly behind the sternum. He looked back at his glass. At some point, Clara excused herself to speak to someone across the room. A mission that would clearly take longer than intended, because Clara's conversational departures were rarely brief. May sat alone at the table with her coffee, looking out the window at the street outside where the last light was settling into the dust. Cole made a decision. He was not generally a man who made decisions impulsively. But something about the evening, the light, the stillness inside his own chest, 2 years of careful distance that had somehow accumulated into a weight he was tired of carrying, moved him from his chair to her table before he had properly thought it through. "Mind if I sit?" May looked up at him. That direct gaze. Unhurried. "I don't recall you asking before you helped yourself to the peaches." Cole sat. "I've been told I improve with time." "By whom?" "Myself, mostly." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but acknowledging the territory. She looked back out the window. Cole looked at the table. The moment had a quality of comfort to it that shouldn't have been possible, given how rarely they'd sat together in direct conversation. They talked, then, about nothing important at first, about the heat, about whether Reverend Hatch's planned harvest supper would be as interminable as the previous years, about a young boy in May's class named Peter Gill who had an almost supernatural gift for arithmetic and a completely natural gift for trouble. Cole found himself talking more than he usually did. Found that the words came easier than expected. That she listened in a way that made speaking feel worthwhile. Clara returned briefly, assessed the scene with visible satisfaction, and announced she had to get home before the light failed completely. A departure so conveniently timed that both Cole and May recognized it for what it was and chose to say nothing about it. So they sat alone together. The saloon moved around them. Voices. The clink of glass. Jake Pruitt finishing his mule story for at least the 3rd time. The Dunmore brothers' card game reaching some kind of grim resolution. And May said something about a letter she'd received from her sister in Missouri. Married 2 years now, 2nd child on the way. And she said it with warmth but also something quieter underneath. Something that Cole, who had gotten unexpectedly good at reading the things May didn't say directly, heard very clearly. He should have said something honest then. He knows that now. He has turned it over 1,000 times in the years since, holding it up against different kinds of light, trying to find the version where he does the right thing. Instead, he said the easy thing. He said it with a smile. With that particular brand of carelessness that men use when they're afraid of how much they mean something. 2 years in Redstone Crossing, he said, nodding toward the window, toward the quiet street, toward the nowhereness of the town they both lived in. "At this rate, May Calloway, you'll never get married." The words landed. He felt them land. He saw her face, just for a fraction of a second before she composed it, do something complicated. And then she looked at him. Very steady, very quiet, and she said 4 words in a voice barely above a whisper. "Only if you ask." She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her cup, set it down, folded her napkin, and was gone. Cole sat at that table for a long time after she left. Long enough that Bess came by twice, looked at his untouched glass, looked at his face, and chose, wisely, not to say anything. Long enough that the Dunmore brothers finished their cards and left. Long enough that the sky outside the window went from violet to black and the oil lamps inside the copper kettle became the only light in the visible world. He turned her words over in his mind. "Only if you ask." 4 words. A whisper. A door opened with extraordinary precision and then, he understood this with a clarity that was almost physical, left entirely in his hands. She had said the truest possible thing, in the quietest possible way, and then she had removed herself from the situation with a dignity that made his careless joke feel exactly as small as it was. He left the saloon just before 9. The street was empty. Redstone Crossing at night was very quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies rather than soothes, that makes a man aware of the sound of his own boots on the dirt, his own breathing, the small mechanical sounds of a world that continues to function regardless of personal crisis. He stopped outside the door. He should go to her house. He knew that. He understood, with every functioning part of him, that this was the moment. That she had handed him something rare and true, and that the correct response was to walk to the east side of town and knock on her door, and say the things he'd been carefully not saying for 2 years. He stood in the street. The night was enormous around him. The stars overhead in their relentless abundance. The red rock formations on the horizon like dark giants asleep. He didn't go. He told himself he would. Tomorrow. He would find her tomorrow, when the words had arranged themselves properly in his mind. When he had figured out how to say what he meant without the whole terrifying weight of meaning it fully. He went back to his room above the copper kettle. The floorboard by the door announced his arrival to no one. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the particular quality of silence that comes when you have done the wrong thing and you know it. Sleep did not come easily. When it came, it brought no comfort. Morning arrived with the indifference that mornings have. The heat returned. The sky resumed its impossible blue. Redstone Crossing woke up and got on with itself. Cole washed his face, drank coffee, told himself the moment of the night before was not as significant as it felt, that he had overthought it, that May Calloway had said a strange thing, a perhaps joking thing, and that appearing at her door this morning would be presumptuous and strange and probably embarrassing for both of them. He was lying to himself. He knew it with the part of the mind that knows things before the rest of the mind is willing to admit them. He went to the livery, worked, hauled water, helped old Garrett with a mare that had thrown a shoe on the trail, worked steadily, methodically, using the physical business of the body to quiet the noise in his head. He did not walk past the schoolhouse that day. This, he would come to understand, was the second mistake. The first had been the joke. The second was the silence that followed it. By afternoon, something in the town's atmosphere had shifted in a way Cole couldn't quite identify. Small towns communicate through the movement of people, the direction of glances, the slight pauses in conversations that stop when a particular person enters earshot. He noticed it the way he might notice a change in wind before a storm, not through any single clear signal but through the accumulation of small wrong details. Mrs. Pryor, who ran the general store, looked at him when he came in for tobacco with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and judgment. Jake Pruitt, usually easy with conversation, was brief to the point of curtness when Cole passed him on the street. He found Clara Moss on the post office steps in animated conversation with the Reverend's wife, and they both stopped talking simultaneously when they saw him approach, which was the kind of coincidence that isn't. Cole stopped. "Something I should know about?" he asked. Clara looked at him, and in her expression he saw something that cut through all of his careful self-deception like a clean blade through rope. "May Calloway handed in her resignation this morning," Clara said. "She's leaving Redstone Crossing." Cole said nothing. Clara watched him process this. "She told the school board she has a position available in Tucson. She's planning to leave within the week." The street was very bright. The heat pushed down from above. A horse tied at the rail outside the barber shop shifted its weight and blew through its nose. The world continued. "Did she say why?" Cole asked. Clara's expression answered before she did. "She said it was time," Clara said quietly. "That she'd been here long enough." Cole nodded once, looked at the middle distance, nodded again, and then he turned and walked back toward the copper kettle. He climbed the stairs to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed. He put his face in his hands. The floorboard by the door did not creak. Nobody came. Outside, Redstone Crossing went on with its day, unhurried, indifferent to any individual's private reckoning. The sun moved its long slow arc from east to west. The shadows shifted. The heat peaked and began its marginal retreat. And Cole Reardon sat in his small room with its single east-facing window and understood, in the specific and irreversible way that real understanding arrives, that he had waited too long. The question now was what he would do about it. The question now was whether he was the man he sometimes suspected he could be, or the man he had mostly, so far, chosen to be. He had 4 days to figure out the answer. He saw her the next morning. He had decided, in the long dark hours of the previous night, that he would speak to her directly, that he would go to her and say the thing plainly, without jokes and without the careful armor of distance that had defined their acquaintance for 2 years. He had rehearsed it, not word for word, He wasn't a man who did well with scripts, but in terms of the essential truth of it. What he meant, what he wanted, what, if she was still willing, he hoped. He found her at her garden. She was working the rosebush, the stubborn, impossible one that had no business surviving in this climate and had decided to do so anyway. She was wearing a plain blue dress, a wide-brimmed hat against the morning sun, and she was entirely absorbed in her task with that quality of full attention she brought to everything. She heard his footsteps on the path. She didn't turn around. "May," he said. "Cole." Her voice was even. Not cold, exactly, but arranged. Careful in the way that a person's voice becomes careful when they have decided on a particular kind of composure and are not intending to abandon it. He stopped a few feet from her. She continued to work the rosebush. "I heard you're leaving," he said. "That's right. Tucson." "Yes." The distance between them felt greater than the physical space. It had weight. It had texture. Cole looked at her profile beneath the brim of her hat, at the careful steadiness of her hands. "May, I want to talk about the other night." "There's nothing to talk about." She said it without harshness, just simply, like a fact she had already made peace with. "I said something foolish." "It doesn't matter." "It wasn't foolish." She turned then, looked at him, that direct gaze, and behind it something carefully controlled, something that was not the absence of feeling but was the deliberate management of it. "Cole." Her voice was quiet. "I've been very patient. With myself, mostly. About letting things be easy for too long. I think—" She paused, looked down briefly, then back up. "I think we have been very comfortable. And comfortable is not enough." He took a step closer. "I know I handled it badly. Last night I should have come. But you didn't." She said it without accusation, just observation. "And that," she held his gaze steadily, "that told me what I needed to know. It didn't tell you what I feel." Something moved in her expression, just briefly, a fracture in the composure. "Then why didn't you come last night?" she asked, and now there was something real in her voice, something beneath the careful surface. "I sat up until 10 o'clock, Cole, with the lamp on." She stopped, composed herself. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you so you understand that this is not a decision I've made lightly or quickly." Cole looked at her. The light was changing around them as the sun climbed higher. Somewhere behind the schoolhouse, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire. Clear, insistent notes in the morning heat. "Give me a chance to make it right," he said. May looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment he could see her weighing things. Not with coldness, with honesty, which is harder. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are a good man, Cole. I genuinely believe that. But I've been waiting for you to decide what you want for 2 years." She looked away across the flat reach of desert beyond her fence line. "I can't wait anymore. Not because I don't—" She stopped, redirected. "But because waiting for a man who isn't ready is a different kind of loneliness than being alone. And I've decided I'd rather be moving forward than standing still." She picked up her gardening gloves. "The position in Tucson is a good one," she said. "A larger school. More resources. There is something ahead of me there. I want to find out what it is." Cole wanted to say many things. He could feel them crowding in his throat. Real things, true things, the words he should have said on any number of quieter evenings when the opportunity had been right there and he'd let it pass. He said, "What if I asked you not to go?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'd ask you if you were asking because you wanted me to stay, or because you were afraid of what it means if I leave." He didn't answer fast enough. She nodded, very slightly, as if this confirmed something. "That's what I thought," she said gently. And it was the gentleness that undid him. Not anger, not coldness, but the particular sorrow of a person who has understood something true and is not surprised by it. She went inside. The door closed quietly. Cole stood in the garden for a while. The rosebush with its improbable flowers. The beans on their frames. The hot, clean smell of dry earth. He stood there until standing there had no purpose, and then he walked back to the main street. Over the next 3 days, He watched Redstone Crossing become a place that was preparing to release someone. May tied up her affairs with the efficiency of a woman who had been planning this for longer than her formal announcement suggested. She met with the school board chairman, Harlan Pruitt, who was pompous and well-meaning in equal measure, and arranged the curriculum materials for whoever would follow her. She gave books to certain students she knew would use them. She donated items to Clara Moss, who received them with a stricken expression she tried to mask with cheerful practicality. The town felt it, the way a household feels the departure of someone essential, a low-grade unease, a slight wrongness in the ordinary texture of daily life. Cole worked. He moved through his days. He did not go back to her house, but every evening he sat at his corner table in the copper kettle and watched the door, not waiting for her to come in, waiting for himself to become the kind of man who walks out. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, she was leaving. The stage came through Redstone Crossing on Tuesdays and Fridays. It was a Friday. Cole was awake before first light. He lay in his bed in the darkness above the saloon and listened to the town breathe its pre-dawn breath, that particular silence that exists only in the last hour before morning, when the night creatures have gone quiet and the day hasn't yet found its voice. He had made his decision. He had made it, in truth, sometime in the previous night's early hours, when the arguments he'd been conducting with himself had finally exhausted their complications and arrived at the simple bedrock of the thing. The truth underneath all his hesitation, all his careful distance, all his practiced carelessness. He loved her. He had loved her probably since the tin of peaches or some point very soon after, and he had spent 2 years treating that fact like a fire you stand close enough to feel warm but not close enough to risk burning. And meanwhile she had waited, not passively, not without her own life and her own certainty, but with the genuine hope that he would find his way to the obvious. He had not found his way to the obvious, but it was not too late. He rose before dawn, washed, dressed in his good shirt, the dark one, not the work-stained gray he wore to the livery. He looked in the small cracked mirror above his washstand. His face looked back at him, weathered, uncertain, older than he usually let himself think about. The face of a man who had run from things for long enough that he'd gotten good at it without ever meaning to make it a habit. He went downstairs. The copper kettle was empty and dim. He let himself out through the front door into the street. Redstone Crossing at 5 in the morning was still and clean. The air held the only coolness the day would offer, a brief, clear gift that the desert gave and then withdrew with the efficiency of something that doesn't believe in charity. The sky to the east was beginning its first gray transition, that earliest hint of light that precedes color. He walked to the east side of town. Her lamp was already lit. He could see it through the window, the warm amber glow of it against the pale pre-dawn, and the sight of it made something move in his chest that he didn't have a name for. She was up. Of course she was. May Calloway was not the kind of woman who left things to chance or to the last moment. Her trunk would be packed and ready. Her house would be in order. She would have said her goodbyes where possible and prepared herself for the ones she hadn't. He stopped at her gate. The rosebush caught the first light. 3 flowers on it. Red against the gray morning, improbable and perfect. He pushed the gate open. He walked to the door. He knocked. A pause. Then footsteps. Then the door opened. May stood in the doorway in her traveling clothes, a gray-blue dress, her dark hair pinned up, her face carrying that composed expression he had come to know so well. She looked at him. She did not look surprised to see him. She did not look relieved, or wounded, or cold. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him, directly, honestly, entirely herself. "Cole," she said. "I need to say something," he said. "The stage leaves at 7. I know. This won't take long." He paused, found the words where he'd left them in the long night. 2 years ago I started leaving coffee out for you. Not because I needed the fence fixed or the door rehung. Because I wanted a reason for you to leave something for me. And every morning I came past and found that cup I told myself it was nothing. That it was just neighborly. That we were just... He stopped. Started again. "I've been lying to myself for so long that I nearly let you walk away without saying the true version. May watched him. The morning light was growing around them. Behind her, the lamp made its small warm circle. The true version is that I don't want you to go, he said. And not because I'm afraid. Because this town. He gestured vaguely at the street, the desert, the enormous sky. This place has exactly one thing in it that makes me feel like a man worth the trouble. And she's standing in front of me wearing a gray dress and looking at me like she's already made up her mind. May was quiet. Her eyes, in the growing light, were very steady. Have you? He asked. Made up your mind? She looked at him for what felt like a very long time. I told you what I needed, she said finally. In 4 words. And you sat in a saloon and went back to your room. I know. And you let 3 days pass. I know that too. So what I need to understand, she said, is whether you are standing here because you woke up before sunrise and found your courage, or because the stage leaves at 7 and it's easier to say true things when there's a deadline. The question sat between them in the cool morning air. Honest. Exact. Entirely deserving of an honest answer. Cole said, both probably. I think I needed the deadline to stop being a coward about the rest of it. Something shifted in her face. Not the composure breaking exactly. More like it becoming unnecessary. The way a hand releases something it's been holding tightly for a long time. I have a position, she said. In Tucson. People are expecting me. I know. I can't simply. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. I'm asking you. He stopped. Took a breath. Said it plainly. May Calloway. Will you marry me? It wasn't even quite a question. Came out like something he'd been holding underwater for years. Suddenly released. The morning arrived fully then. The sun cleared the horizon. And May Calloway stood in her doorway. And said nothing. The silence after his question was the longest of Cole Reardon's life. It lasted perhaps 6 seconds. But in those 6 seconds, Cole experienced something very close to the full range of what a man can feel. The particular terror of having finally said the true thing and understanding that truth, once spoken, cannot be retrieved. Cannot be softened or redirected or laughed off into something safer. May looked at him. He looked at her. The morning light was on her face. The honest, unsparing light of early desert sun that shows everything. Every line, every shadow, every flicker of thought. He watched her think. And then she said, when? 1 word. Not yes exactly, but not no. Cole understood immediately. He steadied himself. Whenever you say, tomorrow, 6 months from now, I'll come to Tucson if you need to be in Tucson. I'll follow that position if that's what you've worked for. I'm not asking you to give up a single thing you've chosen for yourself, May. I'm asking to be, he paused, found it, part of whatever comes next. If you want that. May stepped back from the doorway, not withdrawing, inviting. She moved inside and he followed her into the small house that was in the process of becoming a former home. Boxes, stacked books, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, one of which held a folded quilt. The lamp on the table giving its warm circle in the morning that was filling up around it. She sat down at the table. He sat across from her. She folded her hands, looked at them, looked up. Do you know what I told Clara? When she asked me last year why nothing had happened between us? May asked. Cole shook his head. I told her that you were the most present absent person I had ever met. A small, rueful curve at the corner of her mouth. That you were always almost there. Cole absorbed this. That's fair, he said. It is. She looked at him. Cole. If I say yes, and understand I am not yet saying yes, but if I say yes, what I need to know is that the man who comes to Tucson is not the man who sat in the copper kettle for 3 days. I need to know that this, she gestured between them, at the small charged space of the table, the morning light, the 2 cups she'd set out from habit with her last packed things, is not the deadline talking, that it's not fear, that it's real. It's real, he said, and the simplicity of it, no elaboration, no performance, seemed to reach her more than any careful speech would have. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me one thing, she said. Something you've never told me. Something true. He thought. He could have said many things. about where he came from, about what he'd left behind on the roads before Redstone Crossing, about the particular shape of the loneliness that had settled into him so gradually he'd stopped recognizing it as loneliness and started calling it by other names. Independence, preference, practicality. He said, "Every morning for 2 years, before I came past your gate to check whether you'd left the cup, there was always a moment where I thought maybe you wouldn't have. And every morning I had to tell myself it didn't matter. That I wasn't—" He looked at the table, then at her. "That I wasn't that far gone." He looked up. "I was always that far gone." May held his gaze. "That's a true thing," she said quietly. "It's the truest thing I've got." Outside, the morning was fully arrived now. The sounds of Redstone Crossing waking, someone's rooster, a cart on the main street, the distant bark of a dog. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that would continue regardless, that required no particular emotional resolution in order to proceed. May stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at her garden for a moment. The rosebush in the morning light. 3 improbable red flowers. She turned. "The stage leaves at 7, she said. "I know. I am going to be on it." The space between his ribs contracted. "Because," she continued steady and clear, "the school is expecting me and I do not break commitments. And because I have learned," she looked at him directly, "that I am not willing to build my life around a maybe. Even a maybe I want very much to be a yes." She crossed the room, stopped in front of him, looked up at him with those dark, honest eyes that had never once given him anything but the truth. "But," she said, "if you come to Tucson, not in a week, not when you've had time to talk yourself back out of it. If you come in the way a man comes when he means something, then we will have a conversation worth having." Cole stood. He was very close to her now, the closest they had stood in 2 years of almost. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks from today. If you're in Tucson in 3 weeks, I'll know it's real. And if I'm not? She held his gaze with absolute steadiness. "Then I'll know something true about you, and I'll be at peace with it." He reached out, slowly, and took her hand in both of his. She let him. "I'll be there in 2, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. That almost smile. The one he had studied and memorized without ever meaning to. "Don't be late," she said. The stage came at 7, rolling up the main street in a cloud of dust and harness noise. May Calloway's trunk was loaded. Her goodbyes to Clara and the others were brief and warm. She climbed in. The stage door closed. Cole stood in the street and watched it go. He stood there until it was gone, until the dust had settled back onto the road and Redstone Crossing had returned to its ordinary day. Then he turned. He walked to the livery. He saddled Birch. He had places to be. The road from Redstone Crossing to Tucson was 90 miles. Cole Reardon rode it in 2 days. He did not stop to reconsider. He did not camp and talk himself into the comfortable logic of retreat. He rode in the way he had said he would, in the way a man rides when he means something. He arrived in Tucson on a Sunday morning, trail dusty and certain, and he found the school. And outside it, in a yard considerably larger than the one back in Redstone Crossing, with a small swept porch and a window box of determined flowers, he found May. She was reading on the step. She looked up when she heard his horse. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You're early." "I said 2 weeks," Cole replied. "It's been 11 days. You're still early." "I know." She put her book down. She stood up. She looked at him across the yard with those steady, honest eyes that had seen him clearly from the beginning, seen the absent presence of him, the almost of him, and had chosen, against all reasonable advice, to believe in the man that might eventually show up. He had shown up. They were married in November, in a church in Tucson that was considerably better maintained than the one back in Redstone Crossing. Clara Moss came, of course. She cried before anyone else did. The rosebush, transported by May in a clay pot for reasons she never quite explained, survived the journey. It bloomed the following spring. Years later, someone would ask Cole what finally made him go. He would think for a moment. He would say, "She didn't wait for me to be ready. She just made it clear that she was worth showing up for. And she was right. There are some jokes that aren't jokes at all. Some careless words that crack open something true underneath. Some almost moments that a man can either let pass like all the others or finally, reach out and hold. Cole Reardon had spent 2 years choosing almost. In the end, he chose the real thing. And the real thing chose him back. What would you have done in his place? Would you have gotten on that horse? Or let her go? Tell me in the comments. And if the story moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.